not supposed to have a favorite. Everybody always says, you know, teachers have pets. Well, and you know, we'll deny it. We'll say, no, we're impartial. Well, I'm here to put an end to that bit of misinformation because Sam is definitely one of my pets. And you'll be able to see that, why that is in just a minute. I've actually gotten to know her pretty well over the last couple of years for several reasons. One is that last fall she took and suffered through an immunology class of mine and actually did pretty well. And then also she was my go-to gal when she did work study in the biology department where I work. And somehow through all those dirty glassware things and some stinky bacterial cultures, right? She was always actually just very, very pleased to work hard and do a good job. And I really appreciated that. I also learned some really important things about Sam. And maybe the most important thing is that her family is everything to her. Her mom and her brother. In fact, maybe you guys could stand up just so that they can see you. Her mom, Sam has told me more than once that her mom has really been an inspiration for her life. And in fact, Sam is, I believe she's fluent in Spanish, aren't you? And that's because of her mom's Hispanic roots, which of course, for somebody that's a budding health professional, that's going to be perfect for her. Also, Sam has a dream, and that dream is to go to medical school, become a physician, and then to provide health care for underserved populations, especially in areas like some of the developing countries around the world. She's quite a dynamo. I guess what I'd like to do is read something to you that I wrote last semester, but you know what, first I got to tell you this. Sam came to me and told me that she was starting Visible Campus, this organization at CBU, and was very enthusiastic about it. And at the time I thought, well, maybe this is just kind of a passing fancy. You know, a lot of students won't stick with stuff, but that was before I realized that Sam can leap tall buildings in a single bound. She's quite a superhero. So let me just read this real quick. In the summer of 2010, Sam started an organization at CBU called Visible Campus. She and a small group of CBU students shared an important goal to spread awareness of global poverty. This was the start of something remarkable. Sam spoke enthusiastically to student groups at CBU about Visible Campus. And with her at the helm, Visible Campus arranged for young Ugandan women from the organization Invisible Children to come to CBU and share stories of their abductions by Ugandan rebels during that country's civil war. This was followed by a book drive on campus that rounded up enough textbooks to fill Sam's car and then some. Visible Campus also spent countless hours selling jewelry made by Ugandan refugees. Money raised for these endeavors was used to support the needs of Ugandan children. So last summer, she had the opportunity to spend a couple of weeks over in Uganda, and I'll let her tell you about that. But please join me in congratulating Samantha Bounds, who is the also, somewhere in my mess here is a check from the Vanderhaar community, and they both go to St.
so much. First off, I just wanted to say these tears are genetic, so if you watch my mom in a second, I promise it'll be okay. You can read about me in there, and Dr. Ogilvie really said a lot of things. I'm really involved in work in Uganda and in communities that are similar, but I think that a lot of the things I do are because I've had good influences, so instead of talking about me, I'll talk a little bit about my influences. First off, my mother for raising me. I told you it's genetics, I'm sorry. And she raised me with the heart to see people all the same. So when I see people suffering, I see my neighbor suffering. I see the people around me suffering. And my brother for being my stronger half, and my big brother, and taking care of me. And people that raised me in my church, such as Ronnie Nations, my youth director, and he just was really a good, strong male figure growing up and showed me right and wrong. My mentors, Dr. Mary Ogilvie, Dustin James, and Julie Hannah-Braden, who aren't here tonight. And then people that see, who have confidence in me and see the good things that can come out of me, like Miss Sadie, and my other teachers that are here. And I just wanted to thank them and thank the Vanderhaar committee for having confidence in me too, and it just really pushes me to do more. And I know I don't have a lot of time to say anything, but I really appreciate it. And I'm just going to keep working. I have plans, and they're coming. So if you want to get involved in something and you've got some time, I've got things for you to get involved in. So just thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Dr. Holmes is a longtime professor of ethics and African American studies at Union Theological Seminary, and she's been a very close associate with many of the religion and theology faculty at CBU. We've collaborated in the past on many things. Brother Jeff Groh, one of my early theology teachers, was one of your visiting professors the last couple of years. Unfortunately, he's now in Chicago. But we enjoyed the fact that you brought him back to Memphis for a little while, Barbara, so we thank you very much for that. And if you would like to come up now and introduce our speaker, we appreciate it. Thank you. Barbara Holmes.
It is such a pleasure to introduce my friend, Dr. Ana Maria Isasi-Diaz, to the Memphis community and to the First Congo family. Thank you, First Congo, for your hospitality tonight. It is greatly appreciated. Dr. Ana Maria Isasi-Diaz was born in La Habana, Cuba. She left Cuba in 1960 as a political refugee. She graduated with a Bachelor of Arts with a major in European history from the College of New Rochelle in New York. In January of 1967, she arrived in Lima, Peru, to join the Ursuline sisters as a missionary, serving in the Maria Madre de Dios parish as a junior high school teacher until 1969. In May of 1977, Dr. Isasi-Diaz earned an MA in medieval history from the State University of New York at Brockport and a permanent certificate as a high school teacher in New York. From Union Theological Seminary in New York, she received a Master of Divinity in 1985, a Master of Philosophy in 1989, and a Ph.D. in Christian Social Ethics in 1990. She has also received an honorary degree, Doctor of Laws, from Lynchburg College in Virginia. Dr. Isasi-Diaz began lecturing and writing in 1982. She was invited to lecture at Union long before she began her doctoral program. After her graduation, graduation, she became a professor at Peru University in Madison, New Jersey. And she is now retired from that position, but not retired from the work of activism and theology. Dr. Isasi-Diaz is an activist-theologian involved in the feminist theological movement. She has worked on and developed and elaborated a Mujerista theology, a theology from a USA Latina perspective. She's the author of several books: En la Lucha, a Hispanic women's liberation theology; Women of God, Women of the People; Mujerista Theology, a theology for the 21st century; La Lucha Continues, Mujerista Theology in 2004. She's also co-authored several volumes. She's a busy woman, isn't she? Ada and I don't see each other very often, but when we do, it is as if we have been talking every night. She is a preeminent scholar and teacher, a prophetic leader committed to justice for all, and a gift to the Church Universal. She reminds us to approach this difficult and important work of ministry with great joy. She reminds us to pause, to dance, to give and receive comfort. I am grateful for her scholarship and her friendship. Dr. Ada Maria Isasi-Diaz.
I didn't want them behind me. I didn't want them making faces at me. Buenas noches. So I am most grateful for the invitation to be here with you tonight to honor Gerard Vanderhaar. I thank Janice Vanderhaar for shepherding this conference, and there has been extra shepherding this year, and for how very kind she has been to me. Thank you, Janice. My previous visit to Memphis was decades ago, when Archbishop Dozier was Bishop of Memphis. He was the first bishop here, and he was the bulwark of justice. Back then, I was invited by the Archdiocese to speak at a Lenten program when I was part of the staff of Women's Ordination Conference and spoke precisely on that issue. Now, such an invitation would never happen. Rome does not allow it. Rome also does not allow the blessing of gay and lesbian weddings. And since I support gay and lesbian weddings, well, as a result, we are gathered here instead of at the regular venue for this lecture. Sincerely, it hurts not to be welcomed by one's own, but it is healing to find a new home. Thank you very much. If you recall, a couple of years ago, we started hearing about the new America, the new USA. For its Sakari of CNN, it is even Susie Orman had a book out about the new America. And I kept thinking, why aren't we, people of justice and peace, talking about a new America? Why aren't we boldly proposing new perspectives from which to look at our country and from which to face our world? That has
21st century. And our purpose in that little book is, how do we look at those founding virtues of this country nowadays? What perspective do we bring to life? How do we understand liberty? What is happiness about it? And how do we pursue it? And that title has been in my mind and my heart for a long, long time. And I have working on a book, a larger book on justice, and something that has come to me very clearly is that it is time for us to boldly claim the fact that we have to be people of justice, and to be people of justice in the 21st century, we have to be about solidarity. And that's what I would like to speak to you tonight, about solidarity. For me, solidarity is the founding virtue of what peace and justice is or should be as we move ahead in the 21st century. So, as a good teacher, I'm going to do a little bit of history here. I hope I don't bore you. If I do, yawn and I'll move on. So you might recall that the French Revolution, 1789, had a three-term theme: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Two of these ideals proposed by the French Revolution, liberty and equality, have been given much attention. Liberty, the political word for it is freedom, has statutory significance. That means that there are laws that protect liberty. The same with equality. Equality has been made into laws that protect human and civil rights. However, nothing like that has happened with fraternity, with sorority. Solidarity is the political word for fraternity and sorority. Solidarity is the political word for community and love of neighbor. Solidarity is the word used when we deal out there in the polis, in the city and nations, with the religious values of being the family of God, God's kin, the kingdom of God, love of neighbor, community, justice. These are essential components of the meaning of solidarity. And sisters and brothers, they're essential components of the gospel message of Jesus Christ. So hoping that somehow we will be able to bring solidarity into our world, that solidarity will become a touchstone for defining life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to turn it into a civic virtue that undergirds laws and social, political, and economic institutions in our society. I want to lay out some understandings of solidarity for you and its importance. And I want to claim very clearly, the second part of my talk, that solidarity is based on a human trait, compassion. So let me first talk about solidarity. I want to boldly claim that solidarity is a prima facie reality. Now the students here, you need to learn a few Latin words so your teachers will give you a plus. So, prima facie simply means that it is obvious that you do not need to argue about it. That it is in your face. That's what prima facie really means. So, it's prima facie that there is an interdependence among humans, between human species and other species, and between the human species and the biosphere. This interdependence is based on the fact that as human beings, we are social beings. not only about the fact that we're social beings, but it also indicates that being social means creating and expanding human bonds, and that it demands reaching beyond one's immediate surroundings to embrace an ever larger number of persons, other species, and our biosphere. It's not a matter of just looking to our little blues. It's a matter of always expanding the human bonds. Solidarity is grounded in the recognizing the zillion of interconnections that make life possible. Solidarity is the tangible acknowledgement and expression of claims that we have on each other, given our social nature and our dependence on each other. You know, Sam, what you said today is just so important, because what you were doing is, when I heard you speak, I heard you say this: those people in Uganda have a claim on me. And that's what we need to recognize. How people all over the world have a claim on me, and I have a claim on them. That whole interdependence of humanity is what is so important. And I thank you at your young age for teaching us that. Solidarity highlights the fact that as citizens of the world, the future of humanity, as well as that of all species and of our biosphere, is not an individual matter. We are all inextricably linked. Therefore, solidarity is a social matter as well as a personal one. And sisters and brothers, it is not an altruistic endeavor in which we can choose to participate or not participate. I want to repeat that. It's not an altruistic endeavor in which we can choose to participate or not to participate. Solidarity refers to common responsibilities and interests that arouse shared feelings and lead to joint action the world over. The goal of solidarity is social cohesion. That is, the recognition that as social beings, we are bound to each other, and that unless we act to make our relationality tangible, we perish. Simply put, since solidarity is the face of human sociality, to negate solidarity is to negate what it means to be human. Solidarity establishes mutuality. Now, when we establish a mutual relationship, we recognize each other as specific persons, not as someone else in general. And this specific recognition of each other is integral to our being. During all these last few weeks, Janice and I have talked on the phone several times, and she has sent me emails, and one of them she says, by the end of this we'll be friends. And when I received that, I thought that's exactly what solidarity is. Being specific people to each other. That's what is so important. Mutuality capitalizes on the human bent and disposition that makes possible the creation of a we. And in Spanish it's a little bit easier, porque nos otros. Los otros es parte del nos. El otro no es aparte de quien yo soy. El otro es parte de quien yo soy. Sorry, but hey, you gotta learn some Spanish. creed, yet one. This we unites many, not in a monolithic or hegemonic way in which the individual selves are lost, but a we that allows otherness to be and to flourish. The many we's of which I am part have to remain open to all the other we's in order not to become self-absorbed and egotistic. Mutuality points to a new order of relationships that considers the other not as another me, not as an alter ego, but an other equal to me, whom I need to be true to, herself or himself, in order for me to be me. I'll go over that again. For me to be me, I need you to be you. I don't need you to reflect me. I don't need you to be another me. I need you to be you, but I need you to be you because if not, I cannot be me. Rejecting or overcoming crass individualism, mutuality brings solidarity to life as a moral obligation that centers on the co-responsibility we have for providing what each one's need for the flourishing of life. We must embrace the moral responsibility of providing for others what they need for the flourishing of their lives. This challenges us to move from the quid pro quo. You give me and I give you. I'm saying we need to move beyond that. Solidarity is not a matter of mutual advantage. I'll help you so you can help me. That's not what solidarity is about. Solidarity is not about what we can give each other. Though there's much that both sides can contribute to each other, solidarity must be about constructing shared understandings to create a future in which all life can flourish. Así que la solidaridad tiene que ver con crear una realidad que podamos compartir. No es qué puedo hacer yo por ti, qué puedes hacer tú por mí. Es mucho más que eso. It has to go beyond what we can do for each other. It has to be how do we create shared understandings so that there can be the flourishing of all life. As a moral value, solidarity provides a goal, serves to motivate and guide human beings, and is a means for evaluating the progress towards establishing shared common interests and a new order of relationships. So when I said to you at the beginning, what do we mean by life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the 21st century? That's my question. What are our shared interests? What is this new order of relationship? And then how does those shared interests and new order of relationship redefine what we mean by life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Solidarity is a normative value at the personal and societal level, at the national and international level, and at the interspecies level, and in the interactions between humans and the biosphere. This means that solidarity is a valid ethical exigency for all of us. I'm going to throw in a little ethical word here. It's not a supererogatory value. Those of you who are Roman Catholic might remember it from the Baltimore Catechism. No es un valor que está más allá de lo que es nuestra obligación. No es algo que se pega al final. It's not a supererogatory value that cannot be required but only advice. Solidarity is not a matter of benevolence, goodness, or kindness. I am claiming that solidarity is a moral obligation for all humans. Though up to now solidarity has been given little attention, equality. Solidarity has to be operative at the systemic level, at the structural level. And here's where perhaps those who usually house this conference have failed this time. They failed to see the need for solidarity at the systemic level. A focus on structures does not negate the role of and responsibility of particular persons. However, the fact is that the social, political, and economic structures can be changed and need to be changed. This is very important for us because we human beings create a structure and then we say, oh, it's always been that way, we can change it. Well, we created them. We can change them. Yeah, I remember when I became, I was a nun for a while, and the second year I was in the convent, they wanted to change something we had done the first Christmas I was there, and I remember one of us knew and said, but it's always been done that way. We had only done it 1 year. But we've been thinking that once established as a pattern, it becomes unchangeable. And the fact is that if we set it up, it's a social construct, so we can change them. We created them, we can change them. So we need to look at our structures and say, how much are they supportive of solidarity? How much do they promote solidarity? And if they don't, then we have to change it. Again, this is all prima facie. It's the reality of who we are as human beings. We depend on each other. We are inextricably linked to each other. And we need to insist that this reality is what has to be reflected in the social, political, and economic structures. It's very interesting to me when you hear on television people say the government shouldn't meddle with the banks. The government shouldn't meddle with the economy. But it was okay when the government meddled to save the banks. The government didn't meddle to save those of us who've lost 1/4 of what we save for retirement. The government hasn't meddled to save those whose houses are worth less than the mortgage they owe, right? So we accommodate the changing of structures for when it benefits those who have the power to control them. Structures represent the interest of those who have the power to control them, and they do not necessarily represent the common good. Now, solidarity operates by demanding just structures, and it is the responsibility of government to see that all of this happens. I don't want you to think I've invented any of this. Nothing of what I've said this far is very innovative. As a matter of fact, since Aristotle, 4 centuries before the Common Era, this understanding of solidarity has existed. Now, in the 20th century, a little thing did happen to solidarity, and that was with the introduction of liberation philosophy and theology. A special bent was given to solidarity. Solidarity was focused especially on the impoverished and the oppressed. There's no discontinuity between what solidarity has been historically and this bent that was given to it. Because what the bent did was say the life of the poor and the oppressed is also of immeasurable value. And solidarity has to be extended to them. And this is particularly true for us Christians to look at, as well as for those of the Jewish faith. For in our scriptures, it is very clear the importance of the widow, the orphan, the foreigner among us. It's very important to remember that we are to visit those in prison, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked. It's intrinsic to to the message in our faith tradition. So, solidarity as a response to human sociality, as well as a historical reality of the vast majority of the world, because the vast majority of the world suffers injustice. So that solidarity has been broken. So when you're talking about peace and justice, what you're talking is about trying to heal the brokenness that this oppression has created. This lack of solidarity has broken the human bonds. So justice in this sense is very much about reconciliation. But that's another talk to give some other time to invite me. Solidarity is not a mere idea, please. So I'm most grateful for your applause, but I don't want you just to applaud an idea and go home. Because solidarity is not an abstraction. It's rather an understanding, a meaning, a knowledge that springs from the reality of those who are most oppressed, who are impoverished in a world because of the lack of structures of solidarity. I have to work to challenge reality in such a way as to overcome individualism, egotism, and greed. Solidarity has to be an ethical value that orients us to change unequal relationships. Solidarity with the impoverished and the oppressed, if not based on specific struggles, however, becomes too general. So again, we can't talk about all solidarity so nice. No, we have to become engaged with particular situations of oppression, with particular situations of impoverishment. You have done with the people of Uganda, like some of us have done in many different ways around the country. So it cannot be a general kind of floating abstraction. As a moral value, solidarity is about the direct link that there is between the benefits and privileges that we have, those of us who live in the first world, and the impoverishment and the oppression of those who live in the third world. I'm going to repeat that. It's not pretty, you might not like it, but I'm going to repeat it. The poverty and injustice in the world is linked to the privileges and richness that we have in the first world. One depends on the other. So let me just give you a few bullet points so you remember something of all this that I've been trying to say. So solidarity is not a matter of just supporting, liking, or being inspired by a cause, a person, or a group of persons. Rather, it has to do with understanding the interconnections that exist between all of us and with paying particular attention to the links that exist between the oppressors and the oppressed, between the sufferings of the former and the privileges of the latter. Not everyone, number 3, is to blame for poverty and oppression, at least not to the same degree. But all of us are responsible for the inhumanness that poverty and oppression causes and sustains. We have to do something about it. That's why I'm saying I say that we're responsible. So somebody else needs it, even if it's mine, they have a right to it. That's what it means when we talk about solidarity when it comes to private property. This responsibility that we have to each other, suffused with solicitude and tenderness, based on this sociality and relationality, is what makes solidarity possible. And to finish, solidarity's goal is social cohesion. How do we come together? How do we coalesce? What does it mean when we say we are a society? Why aren't we taking stock in redefining what do we mean by the American way of life? Why are we letting Romney and Santorum and Gingrich define the new American way of life? That's the moral responsibility and moral obligation we have. I also want to tell you, I'm sure I have a file in the White House. I write to Obama every week. Like when he went for the super PAC, I thought it was a terrible violation of what Obama had been standing for. Why are we going to let him define how are we going to run the money part of our politics? We have a moral obligation to take responsibility for that. All right, let me go to the second part of it. We'll never finish tonight. Now, one of the things that I've been working with is because when I talk about all of this, I get back from my students this whole issue of, no, but this is a society of rugged individualism. This is a society of competitiveness. Well, yes, it is. But does it have to be? That's the question. Because we have taken individualism and competitiveness to be virtues of the American way of life. Why? Why cannot we say solidarity and compassion are the virtues of the American way of life? And I want to talk to you a little bit about compassion, because solidarity emerges not only from the bonds of interrelationality that we have as social beings, but also from the compassion that we human beings have. So I want to again boldly claim that compassion is natural to human beings. Compassion is natural to human beings. Aggressiveness, competitiveness, cutthroat In other words, we are not at the mercy of our instincts. We can behave differently than caring only for ourselves. Besides this wiring for compassion in our human brains, we then have what we were talking before, the fact that we are social beings. So there's a lot in which we can ground this understanding of solidarity. It's not strange to us. We need to be clear about the fact that there's a physical component for compassion. I'm sure you know the work of Karen Armstrong and her Charter for Compassion. I invite you to read her work and go to the webpage that she has. She has been adamant about this proclamation for a long time now. Now, what is compassion? I understand compassion to be a sympathetic or empathic awareness of others that as a value or principle impels us to work tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures, to dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there, and honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being, treating everybody without exception with absolute justice, equity, and respect. I want to work with you, I promise you, just 10 more minutes, on compassion, because it's a word that can be confused. Compassion is not the same as pity, empathy, sympathy, or mercy. All of these words belong to the same family, but they're not all the same. Mercy is, of all these words, the one that might be further removed from compassion. Mercy refers to leniency in selecting punishment, and is usually motivated by pity or sympathy. Pity, as it is used today, has nuances of condescension and superiority. I have pity on you, I'm kind of superior to you, so I can have pity on you. And empathy refers to enter imaginatively into another person's experience. Most of the time in common usage, empathy seems to refer to a situation that is sad or painful. Now, pity, empathy, mercy, you all have to make some judgment. You can by now guess that my field is Christian ethics or moral theology. So you make judgments when you're having pity on somebody, when you empathize with somebody, you're making judgments. But these judgments are not very extensive. You don't enter very much into a deeper consideration, a serious consideration, which is what you do when you have compassion on someone. Now, when do you have compassion on someone? First of all, compassion has to do with the seriousness of the situation. Painful, sadness, we see somebody who's pained, we have compassion on them. And there's a great continuity, and I'm going to go back again to Aristotle, on the things that we are compassionate about. And this comes from him. He says, what demands compassion is death, bodily assault or ill treatment, old age, illness, lack of food, lack of friends, separation from friends, physical weakness, disfigurement, immobility, reversal of expectations, and absence of good prospects. Not a bad list. I think in the 21st century we would agree with good old Aristotle. But compassion is also a cultural matter, and it's also a historical matter. Let me give you because his ballpoint had run out of ink and he had no other one. So the other student looked at his ballpoint, considered it, and finally gave it to me. He had no other ballpoint. Neither of them had another ballpoint. Ballpoint cost a lot in Cuba those days. Now, in my backpack, I had a zillion ballpoints taken from all the hotels I stay in. And so for me, a ballpoint had absolutely no value. So I immediately opened and gave each a ballpoint. And then they ran after me, Profesora, ya terminé. They wanted to give it back. I said, please keep them. I have almost of them. So in that sense, I felt compassion for them when I realized they didn't have a ballpoint. But here, he said, I don't have a ballpoint. Well, you have 10 cents to go buy one. I would feel compassion for you. So culture and historical situation determines the compassion. Or if I use the ballpoint my sister Gloria gave me when I wrote my first book, you might feel sorry for me because it has meaning. You see what I was trying to say? So compassion is not something that flows, but it's historically incarnated. So that's the first thing we have to consider. That compassion is about a given situation in which we feel sorry for the other person. Now, the perspective in compassion is not the one of the person suffering, but of me having compassion on you. And again, that happens to us a lot of times. I'll go over to you and say, I'm so sorry. You say, oh, don't feel bad about me. Because from your perspective, it might not be that great, but compassion is on the part of the person who is having the compassion. Okay? Something for you to consider. One second element of compassion has to do with meriting compassion. So, some people might be in a terrible, distressful situation, but having compassion or not having compassion, judge that it's their fault. So then I don't have compassion on them. So it's the judgment, and you have to merit it. You might say that's not fair. I agree, but that's the way compassion works. But I'm saying that all of this is part of our daily lives. That compassion is not such a foreign thing. That we engage in this kind of judgments day in and day out. And the third thing is that compassion establishes a certain relationship between the person having compassion and the person for whom you are having compassion. And that's the basis then for solidarity. When you have pity, it passes. When you have mercy, it passes. But when you have compassion, there's more than that. I wonder, Sam, what was your first moment of compassion for the people of Uganda? I've had the privilege of being there and staying there with some families. But it moves us to see their struggle for life. And that then makes me establish an ongoing sense of relationality with them. And that is what then becomes the rooting of solidarity in compassion. Is that clear? Does that make sense? I know you're not supposed to talk until the end, but if it doesn't make sense, I want to go over it again. Go on? Okay. So, I want to be very careful about this because we cannot lose ourselves in each other. We each are who we are, but with the understanding that who I am depends on who you are. What is it to you if I, jump off the bridge? It is to me, because who you are makes me more or makes me less. I want you to be your best self so I can be my best self. It's not that kind of, selfish kind of understanding. But it's the understanding that compassion for her own sake, makes me a better human being. and it makes possible for her the flourishing of her life. Again, compassion is not supererogatory and it's not altruistic. It is intrinsic to our humanity. And I want to very much work with this whole issue of how compassion is an emotive or an affective response to something or someone outside ourselves. It's a reaching into a level of ourselves that pulls out from our very heart, our emotions. Now, all the major religions, Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, they all include compassion among the values that they teach. And also some of the secular traditions, humanism, or even Buddhism, Confucianism, excuse me, they pull on the sense of compassion as central elements. Unfortunately, in our society, compassion is not a cultural value. With all due respect, do you remember the Republican, one of the zillion of times they have been on television, and when one of them, as well, if someone is dying, would you offer them medical help? And people said, no, I started to clap. I mean, I just sat there and cried. It's just like not being compassionate is a cultural value? Come on. What are we turning this society into? So this idea of using compassion as a guiding principle has to become central, not only in who we are at the personal level, but also in our society. And here with this whole issue of justice and peace, I think, come together. To defend life, to being compassionate, is to take that ultimate value which is life, and make it central to all the institutions in our society. Military and economic power have shown themselves not to be effective in providing security for people around the world. So I ask myself, why can't we give compassion and solidarity a chance? Why not stop managing suffering and, based on compassion, move to dismantle the structures that are causing the suffering? A politics of compassion moves us away from income, wealth, and military might as organizing principles for government, and taking at value the claim that the principal responsibility of the government is to provide security for the people. Let us move to an understanding of compassion so that all life can flourish. Now, at times, I'm ready to alarme los pelos. I'm just ready to pull my hair. We make no advance. But then I said, wait. Let's, maybe a few little steps have been made. So I want to end in a positive note. So let me tell you a few of the little steps. The focus has been might is right. But some changes have happened. Consider, for example, the laws that we have that somehow, in a limited way, but they take responsibility for providing care for the mentally and the physically differently able. It's just a little bit of a touch of difference, but it begins to be a difference, and I want to hang on to that. Consider that since 1990, the United Nations Human Development Index, which measures nowadays not wealth and income or freedom in evaluating the nations, but instead focuses on the resources the governments provide to citizens to develop their human capabilities. Not a huge step, but a beginning step. So it's not gross national product that puts you at the top of the list, but it's what the resources the government provide for its citizens to develop their human capabilities. Then, when considering moving away from income, wealth, and military might as organizing principles for government and moving to the flourishment of all human life, let me invoke the name of a tiny kingdom in Asia called Bhutan. B-H-U-T-A-N. I want you all to go home and Google it. Now, there's a lot of problems with Bhutan. It's not a perfect place. It's not Shangri-La. But they have designed gross national happiness as the indicator by which to measure the quality of life and social progress, instead of economic indicator, or what they make insofar as property. So for me, it's just, maybe it's because my hair cannot get any whiter anymore, but I just need to find some things that begin to say, maybe we are moving a little bit ahead. How do we bring that home? How do we bring this to the United States? How do we change the political language so that compassion and solidarity become organizing values for government programs? I ask myself that. How do we make compassion and solidarity the principles for organizing how we use our money, or the principal elements in our institutions, the goals of our universities, the programs of our churches? What do we do to take these few little steps that we have made to move away from effectiveness or military might as what becomes key in evaluating who we are, what we do, and how we spend our resources? So I think that we need to take really responsibility for this whole, in this time, for redefining what do we mean by the American way of life. And again, I want to say, let's take those founding virtues and say, how do we talk about them today so that compassion and solidarity can be key? Now, let me conclude by saying this. I think if we go home, I did this when I was young. You know what you do when you're young, but I remember for a while, every morning, I would write in my arm, justice in ink. I wanted to engrave it. I wanted to become part of me. So I kept thinking, how to engrave solidarity and compassion in our hearts? How do we move strongly? I'm not afraid of saying it. Aggressively, that doesn't necessarily mean violently, to be in solidarity with all, particularly with the impoverished and the oppressed. How do we demand compassion and solidarity from our politicians, our community leaders, our church leaders? Sisters and brothers, at the end, the question is always the same, at least for those of us who are Christians. And I'm sure those of other faith traditions ask themselves the same question but with different language. Are we followers of Jesus, or are we admirers of Jesus? I think most of us are simply admirers. So when we hear Jesus, we clap. But are we followers of Jesus? If we are followers, possessed man and the blind that he cured, with frightened Peter and doubting Thomas, with Martha and Mary when their brother died, with the women who washed his feet, and he told us always to remember. I really think solidarity and compassion are the face of justice and peace in the 21st century. But they are the kind of values that are virtues. They exist only if we practice them. They do not exist as an idea. So I beg of us to go out thinking always, how do we make of compassion and solidarity the heart of la lucha? My mother is 99. She always says, mientras que el Señor nos dé fuerza para la lucha, estamos bien. As long as God gives us strength for the struggle, we are doing fine. Once in a while she says, oh, it's such a struggle, and then she'll stop and she says, but what if we didn't have la lucha? What will our lives be if we didn't have the struggle for compassion and solidarity? Only then will we be able to claim that we are people of peace and justice. Muchas gracias.
What an honor this has been, but it's not over. We have another 10 to 15 minutes that you can ask questions. We only ask one favor, that it be a question and that it be brief so that our guest speaker can give you a full answer. So we have a mic in the middle. Those of you who would like to ask brief questions, please do so.
As teachers, we can ask our students to do projects in groups rather than individually. We can ask our children and grandchildren to engage in joint projects rather than to compete with one another. What are some other small, concrete steps that many of us can take that start to change this ethos away from the competition, the winner take all?
Here. It's very difficult for us in school, but I always keep trying it anyway, is to do group projects so that everybody has to contribute and they get a grade as a group. Now, unfortunately, some students just coast along while a few do all the work and then everybody gets the grade. But anything we can do to promote group projects, I think it's very, very important. The other thing is, in any way that we can get our children to share. I was amazed, I was visiting some friends, and they have 3 children, all under 12, and each one got for Christmas their own iPad. Well, I don't own an iPad, but I think they're over $200 each now. So why not at least have one and let them use them together? Or anyway, each child has a television in their room. I think things like that in the home destroy a sense of the we-ness. So anything we can do to promote the we-ness is extremely important. Thank you.
Last year, there was some research in the UK that proved that conservatives are incapable of empathy. I don't know if you've heard this, but I take it very seriously. The What do you think about that?
Yeah, I really don't know. I don't know about that research. But I think that the issue that human beings are wired for compassion is something that I very strongly believe in. That doesn't mean that we are not compassionate many, many times, but I still think we're wired for it.
First of all, I want to say I agree with 98% of what you said.
Thank you.
But I want you to help me respond to people who tell me that among los otros are those who intend to do us harm, and we need to protect ourselves with large armies and high-tech weapons and fences at the border because los otros are coming, and the Iranians are going to develop a nuclear weapon and bomb Israel and bring us into World War III, and we have to be ready. How do I respond to those people?
I have no doubt that some people want to do us harm, but the question is arming ourselves the way to protect ourselves? And what I was trying to say is that what I have learned, I live in New York City, so since 9/11, one of the things that became obvious to us is that military response has not brought us peace and security. Shortly after 9/11, Thich Nhat Hanh, he's the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, came to speak at Riverside Church. And by then, of course, we could see that the Bush administration was getting ready to bomb Iraq and all of that, and also Afghanistan. And Thich Nhat Hanh said, what if instead of bombing, we use the cost of those bombs and bomb them with goods, with food? And a nephew of mine said to me, "Oh, Diana, you're such an idealist. That will never..." So 10 years now after that, I just saw him recently. I said, "I am the idealist? What has been accomplished militarily?" I think what Thich Nhat Hanh said makes a lot of sense to me. Why not try it? Why not try it? I think we have to boldly kind of figure out other ways of proceeding. So, unfortunately, we are fallen human beings, and there's evil in the world. I'm not denying that. But what I'm saying is, what should be our concerted response? And I think, we keep saying this is the biggest, best nation in the world. Catch all the more responsibility we have to change the way we respond to evil. That's what keeps, I don't know, those scriptures keep haunting me about that.
Thank you so much for being here. Flabbergasted. I'm a hippie, and so I come from the commune, hug everybody, share the bread, and I really have a hard time sort of making people understand that I don't want your thing, I don't want your house, I don't want your dog or your cat. I just want to be a part of it. And this is a very difficult thing for me to explain, no matter how simple the language. So what can I say? How can I respond to those people that are, this is mine, and you get yours.
I think we have a long battle as an old hippie to another one. I think we have a long way to travel because we continue to believe very much on individualism. It's proclaimed as a virtue. This is one of the hardest things for us Latinos in this country. I'm not saying that we Latinos are perfect, but we come from a sense of community and sharing, and we find it very hard to then have our children go to school and have to learn this competitiveness and individualism. It's against what our culture teaches. So it's very difficult to change our culture. But I really think we need to demand a lot of this from those who serve in government, in churches, in institutions. Because at But unless we can get our leaders to really embrace this kind of compassionate, solidarious kind of thinking, we're not going to get anywhere. So, and that's why I went back to the whole issue of the French Revolution. Because, you know, the American Revolution was very much inspired and even framed as part of the French Revolution. So I keep saying, how come fraternité never comes into play? How come the other two we have made into laws, but this whole issue of solidarity has gone by the wayside? And I think we really need to challenge the authorities on this.
Gracias por sus palabras. I can't ask my question in Spanish, I'm sorry. But I will ask a question about immigration. And what is it that we can do to teach or encourage or just help our fellow Americans who have the joy of having been born here or somehow or another to have been accepted here, to learn to accept our immigrants, some of whom come without proper papers when they come across the border, and yet they're still good people.
Boy, hermano, that's another whole talk. This is my third invitation. For me as an immigrant who came here as a political refugee, the most difficult thing is the American sense that this is the best country in the world, because that makes all the other countries not as good as you. And it makes you believe that everybody should be like you are. So that for me is the main thing that we need to work at. I remember years ago I was watching one of the Democratic or Republican conventions, and they were going on and on about the best country in the world, and I was furious and screaming and throwing. I always wear soft slippers in the house so I can throw them at the TV. And I was with two friends, and once I calmed down, she said, "But don't all the countries say that?" I said, no, all countries don't go around saying they're the best country in the world and everybody should be like we are. So what do the politicians say? So I said, well, for example, in Peru where I live, they talk about the glorious times of the Incas, or, you know, whatever is their national pride, but they don't base their programs on the fact that everybody should be like we are. So I think that is so ingrained and continues to be the talk. I mean, you know, I think it was Ronald Reagan, maybe it was before him, I don't remember, but I think it was him who started with the thing of the president ending every talk saying, "And may God bless the United States of America." It's like the Pontifex Maximus, you know, the high priest, kind of holding this blessing. Everybody should be like we are. No, not everybody should be like we are. I spent 2 weeks this last year in Senegal, and, you know, a very poor country, going now through some problems, political problems and so forth, but no, they're never going to be like we are, and they don't want to be like we are. That's not their ethos. That's not their culture. That's not the way they understand themselves as a people. So then you say to me, well, why do they all come here? If they all come here, they should all be like we are. No, Dominican Republic made, immediately in la prensa, el diario, the Spanish newspaper, we're making a collection so we can send their bodies to be buried back home. People want to go back home even if it's in a coffin. So I think we need to have a sense of the fact that this is a great country, but it's not the greatest, and that we need to learn from others. And that's something, unless we have that kind of openness, we'll never be able to welcome immigrants.
I have a question. I was really struck when you mentioned that years ago, Bishop Dozier, actually, you were invited to come here. That years ago, Bishop Dozier and you were invited to come speak. And it's a little different now.
Yes.
And so I was wondering, what has changed in the climate? Like why has the conversation changed? What's changed in the culture so that different is a threat? Do you know something?
Yes, I understand. Let's see. I was telling this to Janice today. One of the difficult things in CBU not allowing me to speak there is that I come from a Lasallista family. My father went to Christian Brothers High School, and my brothers and my cousins in Cuba, and to Manhattan College in New York. I mean, this is part of my family tradition. So it was extra hard to be not allowed to speak there. But what has changed dramatically is the undoing of Vatican II. Archbishop Dozier and the whole group of bishops that came up at that time were really versed and converted and moved by Vatican II. And two things, I mean, a lot of teaching of Vatican II, but two quick things. One, central to the teachings of Vatican II is that we are the church. The people of God became the main point of reference for the church, not the hierarchy and not the clergy. We are the church, el pueblo de Dios. That became the main category of Vatican II. And the other thing was, in the attempts under John the 23rd and then Paul the 6th to decentralize the church, to allow the bishops of the United States to make the decisions that could be made. It's called the principle of subsidiarity. So if the professor in the classroom can make the decision, it's not for the dean to make the decision. If the dean can make the decision, it's not for the president to make the decision. So that decentralizing of the church gave much more authority and possibility to the body of national bishops. And at that time, in the 1970s into the 1980s, we had a significant number of bishops that were of that mindset. So the church really moved that. The laity became very much involved in running the parishes. There were councils that advised the bishops nationally of lay people and so forth. And that has now changed. For all that, the immense contributions of John Paul II in the issue of social justice, when it came to church, he began to again centralize the church. And everything gets referred back to Rome, and everything gets decided by Rome. So there's not the openness to possibilities of issues that there were then. So until John Paul II was elected, I think that was in 79, if I remember, the question of the ordination of women, we weren't moving a lot on it, but at least we could discuss it. We had an ongoing dialogue, official dialogue, with the American bishops on the issue of ordination. But then after that, they said, that's not anymore an issue to be discussed. It cannot be discussed. And the same thing with this issue of gay and lesbians. It's not, they don't even want to talk about it. There's no dialogue. You can see that with this whole issue of healthcare, contraception, women, and Obama. They're not talking about it. They're not willing to dialogue in any way. They just come down with the dictum. And it's kind of, the church has gone back to that centralized kind of authority. And, like the brother who said, I'm a child of the Second Vatican Council, I think that we the people are the church. And I believe in the sensus fidelium. I believe that the Spirit speaks as much through us as the people of God as it does through the Pope and the hierarchy. So,
as a student at CBU, I often find myself in a class or discussion with my teacher afterwards. And particularly in the classes, we have discussions that come up that really make the compassion that's wired inside of me just seem to surge. And then in that discussion with the professor, it often seems, or this is what I tell the professor, it often seems that compassion is shut down because it's so overwhelming. The society that we live in seems to shut that compassion down because the small voice that I do have, or that me and a group of friends have, seems to be shut down. So I guess my question is, in a society that doesn't really value compassion, how do we, as young people whose voices seem to be shut down all the time, how do we make our voice heard, or how do we make this compassion something of a reality?
Organize. As a good Sololinsky student, and that's what Newt Gingrich is so afraid of Sololinsky. You have to find other people, and you have to have good arguments. That's what I tried to do in the talk. I could have given a rousing speech, but I wanted to give you some meat so that you can build good arguments. You have to have good arguments. And then you got to get numbers. And that's what the social web is helping us to do, that it can get numbers behind some ideas and begin to bring pressure. But I think that you got to organize, you got to keep at it and know that it can work against you. You are taking a risk. And you got to measure and say, well, can I take that risk? And then keep organizing about it. I know no easy way about it. And the persistence is immeasurably valuable. So even if it's just 3 or 4 of you, you got to stay at it. You got to stay at it. He told me quickly. So they closed my parish 5 years ago in East Harlem. And there's a group of us who meet outside the church every Sunday for the last 5 years. Through rain, snow, whatever. We're there. It's a group, we started about 20, 30, now we're about 12. But it's the persistence of that has created now some possibilities. So that Rome now told Cleveland that they had to reopen some parishes that they had closed. Now, I'm not saying there's a direct relation, but I think that the persistence of some of us, even if it's in a small way, does begin to make change happen.
I'm also a student. I'm from Minnesota, and here visiting some friends who just graduated. And they brought me here to listen to you, and I'm really grateful because I do believe when people are searching for something, they hit a frequency, and we're all kind of saying the same thing. And I'm always very grateful that I can do that. And so, as a struggling student, I'm trying to measure that risk. And I'm really good at being persistent, but I'm really bad at what my professors like to call discipline. And so I can't do these awesome things that I know need to exist until I can jump through these hoops and get that little piece of paper at the end. And I just want to know what you believe kind of still embodies that pursuit of justice while still like needing to be competitive, because I'm worthless in this society without a bachelor's degree, and we can debate that, but like Harvard won't accept me with my GPA, you know, like, so like at what point do I stop thinking I'm a hopeless cause because of this arbitrary number?
Yeah, I'm not against competitiveness, and I think you need to challenge yourself. But the competitiveness that is about putting others down or stepping on others to get somewhere, that's when the competitiveness gets terribly ugly and destructive. But I think one of the most important things for us to do is to do things together as groups and to hold each other accountable. You know, so I'm a single woman, but I come from a very close-knit family. So my family is very much something what sustains me, but they also challenged me. You know, I mean, they wanted to know what I was going to come say here after all the hoof-hurrah of not being able to talk anymore. So, you know, I had to sit down and send out an email and say, well, this is what I'm going to talk about. Okay, all right, Diana, but remember, say this, that, or the other. So, how do we hold each other accountable and not think that accountability is something a ti que te importa, no te metas. No, it's none of your business. Leave me alone. No, it is my business. I want to be held accountable. If I know you're holding me accountable, it frees me to try some things, because I know if I go off the deep end, you're going to say, hey, Ada, come back. You went off the deep end. So I think we have to have a sense of that we. So a couple of friends that can call each other into accountability, that can challenge each other and help each other, I think is very important. At least it has been for me.
Something that's been brought to my attention kind of consistently in the past couple months is our tendency to place more attention on the tyrant of any problem than on the victims.
I can't hear you well. I can't hear you well.
Can you hear me better? Something that's been placed to my attention kind of consistently recently is our tendency to put importance on the tyrant and bringing down the tyrant in history rather than bringing up victims. And whether it be Hitler, Gaddafi, Idi Amin, or now recently Cody, I'm seeing that we are placing this importance on bringing down the tyrant and not on bringing up its victims. And my question to you is to maybe give me some advice on how to convince others to place more importance on the compassion of the victims than hatred for the tyrants.
It always seems for us human beings, I don't know why, that it's easier to be against someone than for someone. So I think that's part of what you're saying. How do we get people more to be for someone than against someone? One of the things I have found important is, you know, I work a lot with the grassroots women in my community, and how rich their lives are, even in the extreme situations of poverty they live. So at times, when I want people to pay attention to La Comunidad, I try to invite them so they can come see that in very simple ways in their lives, these people try to make spaces for happiness. They try to make spaces to contribute, so that in being for them, we are trying to enrich the community. This is what I think has been so sad about the whole issue of affirmative action. Affirmative action has been seen as giving a chance to those that before we discriminated against. But really, affirmative action is about allowing for the gifts of those that have not been recognized to be contributed to the community. So if we are about affirmative action for African Americans, for Latinos,
I was talking about. How do we see that until the other is fully who she or he can be, I cannot be fully myself. So I think that's part of what we need to work out so that people can really focus on those who are in need, but still have some